Stephen Baskerville said virtually every major social pathology can be linked to fatherlessness. Fatherhood. What are the first thoughts and feelings that come to mind when we hear father or fatherhood? For most of us, maybe we think of a biological father, a protector, a provider. We might associate it with the captain of the family ship, the main man who is wise, knows what is going on, where the family is heading, and what to do when there's a storm brewing on the horizon. When we all instinctively look to him for guidance and direction, he calmly takes the wheel and directs the family to safer waters. But is this a universal definition? And has this always been the way that fatherhood has been defined and understood? Much research has been done in recent years, on this topic of fatherhood and father-child relationships. We're all probably too aware of the widespread debate around both the meaning and the importance of fatherhood in our social landscape, which is drastically changing. For those of us who have been around for more than a few decades, it's also quite clear that patterns of parenting and child rearing has changed in the last 50 years. As a result, the landscape and the roles of relationships now include not only biological fathers in intact two-parent families, but also stepfathers, married and unmarried, resident and non-resident biological fathers and or adoptive fathers. One must also take into account that there is a focus on cultural variability in different countries, like for instance in South Africa and Africa as a whole. In order for us to come to a point where we are all on the same page in terms of what we mean and what we don't mean with the word fatherhood, let us first take a look at how the meaning of this word has been understood over centuries. Let's start with the Western world, since most of the debates in the past were premised on the Western formulation of fatherhood in the context of the nuclear family. In much of the Western world, the era after the Second World War was viewed as politically conservative. The traditional family, led by a breadwinning father and a homemaking, child-rearing mother, was advocated for. Today, there are thousands of professional articles written which focus on the ways in which fathers affect their children's development. What is it that fathers specifically do? Well, the roles that fathers play are informed by historical, cultural, and familial ideologies, and without a doubt shape the total amount of time that fathers spend with their children, the activities they share with them, and also possibly the quality of relationships between fathers and children. So in earlier times, fathers were viewed as all-powerful heads of their families with a lot of power over their families. In most of the Western world, fathers were viewed primarily as moral teachers and primarily responsible for ensuring that their children grew up with an appropriate sense of values, quite primarily from studying the Bible and other scriptural texts. So after that, during the time of industrialization in the 18th century, there was a shift in the definition of fatherhood from moral leadership to breadwinning and economic support of the family. Then social scientists started portraying fathers as sex role models with concern about the failures of many men to model masculine behavior to their sons. This was most probably as a result of the Depression in the 1930s, which revealed many unfortunate fathers as poor providers. During the 20th century, fathers were encouraged to be involved, and in the late 1970s, a concern developed with the new nurturant father who played an active role in children's lives. Thus, the importance of involvement was increasingly underscored. So, fathers play various important roles. They are care providers, protectors, spouses, role models, moral guides, teachers, and breadwinners. The importance of these different roles, however, vary across cultures and over different eras. In order for us to evaluate a father's impact on child development, we need to consider the father's performance of the various roles and how important the various roles are in the specific socio-economic context. This brings us to our context here in South Africa. Traditional African families and communities in our country share traditional ways of being. And in these traditional African contexts, a parent is not necessarily a child's biological mother or father. Because African children are likely to be raised in a family community, that is, a collective of immediate and extended relatives, in which social parent figures, these can be anybody in the community, for example, teachers, peers, neighbors, and father figures, biological fathers, grandfathers, brothers and or uncles, can take on a parent role to any of the children in the community. In this context, studies typically describe both fathers and or father figures as making material, financial, and or educational and instructive contributions. It is clear from the above description that the African context differs significantly in terms of the meaning of fatherhood and obviously fatherlessness as well. In the traditional African context, fatherhood has a lot to do with the experience of being there, meaning quality time, the quality of time and relationship between the father and the child, rather than the amount of time spent together. And once again, it's not only the biological father who can be there for their sons, but also social fathers, other significant role models, and father figures who step in at different times in children's lives when biological fathers are unavailable. Thus, in our South African context, people in different contexts will understand the definition of fatherhood and therefore fatherlessness differently. Yet the importance of fatherhood remains and is crucial to a healthy society. And therefore, we as Action Society are studying this phenomenon, since we understand all too well and agree with Stephen Baskerville, whom we quoted at the beginning of this article, that virtually every major social pathology can be linked to fatherlessness. In few places in this world is it more evident than in our beloved South Africa.